When teaching students about Augustus, I have always stopped to remind them that he was not quite 19 when he thrust himself into Rome's extremely violent politics, hence almost always younger than anyone in the class. It is often hard to remember this when recounting what he did, skillfully and unscrupulously maneuvering his way through the twisting allegiances of these years of civil war. The great-nephew of the murdered Julius Caesar, he was made the principal heir in his will and given his name, which he took to mean full adoption. Power was not supposed to be inherited at Rome, but, armed with this name, he rallied the dead dictator's supporters and proclaimed his intention to assume all of his father's offices and status. He then proceeded to achieve precisely that, against all the odds and opposed by far more experienced rivals. Mark Antony was the last of these, and he was defeated and dead by 30 BC. The young, murderous warlord of the civil wars then managed to reinvent himself as the beloved guardian of the state, took the name Augustus with its religious overtones, and was eventually dubbed the father of his country, an inclusive rather than divisive figure. He held supreme power for 44 years, a very long time for any monarch, and when he died of old age, there was no question that his nominated successor would follow him. Yet, in spite of his remarkable story and profound influence on the history of an empire which has shaped the culture of the Western world, Caesar Augustus has slipped from the wider consciousness. For most people, he is a name mentioned in Christmas services or school nativity plays, and nothing more than that. Hardly anybody stops to think that the month of July is named after Julius Caesar, but I suspect even fewer are aware that August is named after Augustus. Julius Caesar is famous, and so are Antony and Cleopatra, Nero, Alexander the Great, Hannibal, perhaps Hadrian, and a few of the philosophers, but Augustus is not. One of the reasons is that Shakespeare never wrote a play about him, perhaps because there is little natural tragedy in a man who lives to a ripe old age and dies in his bed. He appears as Octavius in Julius Caesar, and as Caesar in Antony and Cleopatra, but in neither play is his character particularly engaging, unlike Brutus, Antony, or even lesser players like Enobarbus. His fate is principally to serve as a foil to Antony, weak, even cowardly, but cold and manipulative where the latter is brave, intensely physical, simple, and passionate. The contrast was already there in the ancient sources, and had its roots in the propaganda war waged at the time. It has only tended to become even more pronounced in modern treatments of the story. Think, for instance, of the glacially cold performance, with just hints of sadism, given by Roddy McDowall in the famous 1963 epic movie Cleopatra. Calculating, devious, and utterly ruthless, such an Augustus encourages the audience to sympathize with Antony and Cleopatra, and thus makes their deaths all the more tragic,